So, Dr. West, what do you see as the potential connections between the Black Lives Matter movement and diasporic communities' struggles? What can both of these groups of people learn from one another? What can Iranian immigrants who are part of the diaspora learn from the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, thank you for that question. I first just want to say I'm blessed to be here and be in conversation with all three of you distinguished professors, Dr. Mahdi and Dariani. Our families, I want to say hello to your family. The wonderful time we had there at Irvine just a few months ago, and of course my beloved Anahita, Dr. Mahadavi. It's always a blessing to be in conversation and see you and so forth. I want to salute Nirvana too, your brilliant daughter who's a PhD student in Complet at University of California, Santa Barbara. Now, I think there's so much for us to learn. When I think of Persian peoples, when I think of the Iranian peoples, I think of a great peoples who have moral and spiritual traditions. Yes, there's been waves of empires. There's been waves of forms of domination and oppression. There's also been waves of resistance, but it's the primacy of the moral and the primacy of the spiritual. By moral, what I mean is people who have profound allegiances to integrity, honesty, decency, and by spiritual, I mean empathy and imagination, not just the great poets, but in the everyday life of Iranians. And I think when I think of Black people in the belly of the American beast in terms of white supremacist slavery, in terms of Jim Crow and Jane Crow, in terms of the new Jim Crow, unbelievable levels of unemployment and underemployment, decrepit housing and inadequate education, not access to healthcare and so forth. The primacy of the moral and spiritual is crucial there. So we come together as a people who have understood the world through the lens of how will we preserve forms of integrity, honesty, decency, truth-telling, and connected to imagination, to get in the skin of other people, to get inside of other people's shoes and walk a mile in those shoes. And so for me, then the question is, how do we look at the American empire and the precious democratic experiment with precious Iranians coming into that empire as a result of US imperial policies, in part with the connection with the Shah, running out of that structure of domination, and of course the new structure of domination occurring right after in '79. We won't get into that right now. But arriving in the United States and looking around and saying, what deep forms of morality and spirituality have been cultivated in the United States at its highest level? Not because of skin pigmentation, but because of choices of a people to sustain a tradition, a hated people who keep dishing out love warriors like Martin King and Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells, and the musicians, the Stevie Wonders, the John Coltrane's and others. And how has that tradition been able to reshape America in such a way that, one, there's a citizenship requirement of just being born. So those precious Iranians who are born in the United States have a certain debt to the Black freedom struggle, to the transformation in immigration laws from the white supremacist law of 1924 to the more open door policy in 1965, in part as a result of the Black freedom struggle. Black people have no monopoly on this goodness, this justice, this love, but have played a fundamental role because they have chosen to play a role. So the Black Lives Matter movement is but another moment, another stage in this long 400-year tradition of Black people fighting for freedom and having implications of persons across the board, no matter what color, white, brown, indigenous people, our precious Iranian brothers and sisters. And you are bringing all of that rich morality and spirituality going all the way back to the time of Cyrus the Great himself. And I'm anti-imperialist, so I'm not crazy about any empire, but at least you got who was concerned about the humanity of the subjects. That's very different than Alexander and others. We won't get into that right now. But when you get the fusion of the greatness of and the best of the Persian and Iranian traditions and the best of the American, which is in part the best of the Black tradition, then maybe together because we're committed to integrity, honesty, decency, truth, and justice, we can march together. Not as allies in a superficial way, but as heirs of great traditions of morality and spirituality, coming together in common ground and bearing witness and serving the least of these, the poor, the fatherless, the motherless, the widows, the children, the elderly, the oppressed, in any corner of the globe. It could be in Tel Aviv, it could be in the West Bank, it could be in Tehran, it could be in Chicago, it can even be in Irvine.